There is nothing wrong with your YouTube player. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. I am now in control. I control the horizontal and the vertical. I can delude your image with a lot of cute cat pictures and the same old tired meme you've seen on the internet reused over and over again and beyond. For the next hour or so, however long this ends up being, I will control everything that you see and hear. Unless, of course, you turn off the video or, look away from your screen, but whatever. You are about to experience the awe and mystery that reaches from the deepest inner minds to a review of The Outer Limits. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Outer Limits Season 6. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every episode of The Outer Limits, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover all the episodes of Season 6. So, I really like Season 6. I think this is a much stronger season than the previous one, Season 5, which is funny because there's more great episodes in Season 5 than there is in Season 6. I don't think there's any really great episodes, maybe one or two. But it's more consistently good. Like, from the beginning, I was like, hey, I like this episode. Hey, I like this episode. I like this episode. Now, there's a few stingers, of course, there are, with every season, but it's more consistently good, whereas Season 5 was kind of the opposite. It was more consistently bad, and there was a few great episodes, where this is more consistently good, but there's a few bad episodes mixed in. They just seem to sort of hit more than they missed this season. Is sort of a more consistent. I talked before about how some seasons are really, really hit or miss and are like really polarized, where this one was one of the more sort of consistent seasons. It was like consistently good but not great, if you know what I mean. Some of them dipped above and some of them dipped below, but most of them stayed in that sort of 7 to 8 range, which is kind of where you want it. So overall, I was more impressed with this season. Now, I had seen more episodes this season than I had from previous seasons. Like, several episodes that I really assumed that were in earlier seasons. So this season aired in the year 2000, so I guess I was watching a lot of reruns in the early 2000s. I don't remember. I was living in various places and I was married at the time. I don't recall sketching out time to watch a lot of syndication Outer Limits. I honestly thought I watched more Outer Limits in the 90s. So when I went to do this rewatch, I was expecting most of the episodes I was familiar with to be in like seasons 1, 2, and 3. But season 1 had by far the most episodes I was familiar with, so clearly that was from when I watched in the 90s. But season 2 barely had any at all. I only had like 2, and then season 3 and 4 had like 0. And they both had like episodes I was somewhat vaguely recalled seeing, whereas season 5 had a lot more, and season 6 now has even more. I think there was 3 or 4 that I very distinctly remember, but then there's more than that I remember once I started watching. I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this episode before. So yeah, that is strange. I had always thought all these years that season 6 and 7 I have seen pretty much nothing from, and those were like the last seasons after I stopped watching the show, but apparently I was wrong. Apparently I was watching the show a lot in the early 2000s, even though I don't remember doing it. Well, whatever. Now, season 6 is the last year. It aired on Showtime. In fact, they thought when Showtime canceled the show, they thought it would be the last season, but it got picked up for another season on the Sci-Fi Channel, which, again, is something I didn't know or misunderstood, because I thought that The Outer Limits was similar to SG-1, where it transferred to the Sci-Fi Channel somewhere in the middle of their run. Like, I thought maybe the last 3 seasons for Sci-Fi Channel. So I thought, oh, the ones on the Sci-Fi Channel are no good. It's only the ones on Showtime that's really great. But, well, I mean, that still could be true. Maybe season 7 is clearly the worst season. Honestly, there's only like a couple episodes I know off the top of my head I have seen from season 7. Both of them I don't like. So maybe it is the case. I don't know. Anyway, let me go ahead and jump right into season 6 of the Outer Limits 90's version, which, yes, I still call it the 90's, even though this aired in the year 2000. Anywho, let's start with the first episode of season 6, which is called Judgment Day. Now, this is very much a Running Man type episode. Now, if you don't know what I'm referring to, there was this movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger called The Running Man. You might say, if you are familiar, you might be like, what are you talking about, Mark? This episode is nothing like The Running Man. This episode is about like a reality show that has a criminal who's been convicted of murder, turned over to like try to run away while this other the victim's family member or whatever tries to hunt him down and kill him, and they like film it on live TV. I suppose you can see some familiarities to Running Man, but Running Man, the film, was more like, Arnold Schwarzenegger going after in these like arena type battles and doing these one-liners when he's fighting all these fancy wrestler type people with like fancy names and flamethrowers and shit. You might be like, well, that's not really like this episode, Mark. But here's the thing, I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about the novel, which if I recall correctly, it was a full-length novel written by Stephen King. It was one of the ones he wrote under a pseudonym, which he to see how good they would sell without his name brand, but eventually he admitted that it was in fact him. And I have read that novel years and years ago, but this said novel was really different than the film. It was more like this episode, where it was straight out like a guy actually trying to run, rather than like having these arena type battles with these silly wrestler types. He was actually like set loose in the public and was trying to run away, and if they went for a certain amount of time without catching him, he could live. And that's basically what happens in this episode. Although this episode is, I guess, has the element. I mean, even the book had people hunting after him, of course, but they weren't like crazy wrestler types. They were just like normal, like police officer types. But it wasn't like this gladiator battle. But anyway, so this episode has like the family member who's running the chase, but it also has the element where there's like a camera in his eye, and the producers try to film everything he does, and it's the evil producer is played by Chris Elliott, the comedian who was in that show that sitcom Get a Life. That's where I remember him from. He was in a lot of like comedy movies in the late 90's and early 2000s as well. Anywho, he kind of dropped off the face of the earth after that. So this producer, when they first introduced him, it was obvious that like this would be the villain of the show, of the episode, that he was a bit over the top cheesy. Oh, ratings. I don't care. It's kind of that stereotype. Now, I thought this was a really interesting episode because at first it was the criminal was trying to convince everyone that he didn't do it, that he was innocent. In fact, at first he refused to run. And he went to the family member and just tried to convince her that he was innocent, but she wasn't buying it. But eventually, as the episode unfolds, you find out that Chris Elliott, the producer guy, actually framed him because the person who actually committed the murder was 16 and therefore wouldn't be eligible for his show. So he purposely framed someone who would be eligible for the show. And he ended up started becoming an over-the-top, cheesy, mustache-twirling villain where he actually killed the victim's sister and tried to frame it on the convict guy, but they got the better of him and they filmed it on live TV. So then the episode ends one last episode of this reality show before it's taken off the air, where the producer, Chris Elliott guy, is now the running man, and the dude who was running before is now the one who goes after to kill him. They sort of cut the credits as he kills him. Nice bit of irony there, but that ending was a little too over the top for me. Because here's the thing, here's what I thought the strength of this episode is how realistic it is. I could definitely see there being a show like this if we keep going in a certain direction. Certainly the way we love to pile on and demonize people whom we deem guilty, and also the sort of reality TV show aspect of it, of wanting blood. And so I thought it was actually a very powerful commentary on that culture, which is really prevalent to this day. It kind of began in the early 2000s. You could even say the 90s, but I think the 2000s is when the reality show kind of really took over. Whereas The Running Man, that was written in the 80s, so that was written more like a game show, but this is more like a reality show, but whatever. Slight difference. So yeah, I thought it was really powerful commentary, but then it got really cheesy with the dude I gotta prove my innocence, and the producer bringing over the top mustache twirly villain. Yeah, but it was still a good episode. I still really enjoyed it. I still thought, wow, this is a great start to the season. So then we get into the next episode, which is called The Gun. Now, this is an episode I've seen before. In fact, it's one that they showed several times on syndication. I remember seeing it at least twice, or at least I turned on to watch another episode of the Outer Limits, and it was this episode again. I'm like, this episode again? I swear they showed it at least 3 times. And yeah, it didn't even come out till 2000, so I must have been watching it in the early 2000s. Had seen it several times. Really, honestly, I was expecting to see this episode in season 2, but whatever. Anyway, it's got John Delancey in it. I remember that because there was commercials and John Delancey. Q from Next Generation. Anywho, so this, I don't know. I never really liked this episode. It seems like it's trying really hard to make a commentary on gun control, which that's probably one of the issues I am most passionate about. Is gun control. Having sensible gun laws the same way we have sensible laws restricting cars, we should have the same ability to restrict guns, and then all the other side keeps throwing out all these straw man about how you want to take away our guns, which is a whole bunch of nonsense. Anyway, so it's an issue I feel really strongly about, so I would think that an episode that tries to make commentary on that is something I would agree with, but I don't think it does a good job. I think, and in fact, it's hard to tell what the message. It's kind of really clear, and it hits you in the face, and it screams that clearly, hey, we got a message about gun control. What is your message? I don't know. It's not very. It's clear, they're screaming that this definitely got us something to say about the gun control, but it doesn't know what to say. It's kind of, so the premise of the episode is this dude goes to a gun show and he buys this gun from Q, who's like, oh, I got this gun. He turns out to be an alien, and the gun, when he uses it to kill his ex-wife who he'd been stalking and abusing, and of course there's commentary there about how that's very obvious commentary about how guns are too easy to acquire. You can go to gun shows where they have all these loopholes, and an abuser who should never have access to a gun goes to kill, murder his victim, basically. It's very tragic, too, because they have a son who has to watch his mother get killed and run away. And so it's got strong commentary there. But then, the gun sort of takes control of his arm and, starts to become part of the gun. And then he goes, and he runs off in the woods, and they had this manhunt where his ex-wife who he murdered has a sister who survived, and she's, really strong, liberal, anti-gun type, and the ex-wife's father is more of like this strong conservative gun nut type. He's like, oh, I gotta go out and kill him. And Q ends up giving a gun to the father of the victim, and then the gun starts to take over his hand as well. And Q is like, he starts to revel in the fact that they're both becoming like completely taken over. Like the gun starts to completely take over their body, and it turns into armor or aliens and all that shit. So I don't know. I don't really get that. I just thought the whole plot of them running through the woods looking to this guy, and the victim's father being like, oh yeah, it's on again. And of course, when the victim's father like refuses to kill the guy, the gun like unlatches itself from him and like departs from him. And Q's like, I'm so disappointed in you. Oh, I'm gonna go find some other humans to try to corrupt. And he reveals he's this evil looking alien. Yeah. And I don't think this is the best commentary. Like the stuff they did at the start, showing how easy it was to get guns from through these loopholes, and an abuser could murder his innocent ex-wife. But and that was actually quite tragic. But then from there, it just becomes like I don't know what the hell is saying, and it becomes a bit boring, to be honest. About them like running through the woods trying to find them, and a bit cheesy with the dialogue. So yeah, I never cared for this episode. That's why I didn't really like the fact they were showing this repeatedly. I wanted to see something else. But anyway, so then we get into the next episode, which is Skin Deep. This is an episode I have seen before, but it was thanks only to the DVD. It was on like the Sex and Science Fiction DVD. I hadn't seen it before I got that DVD. And so this episode I kind of knew would be in the later seasons, because I knew it was like towards the end of the DVD, and I hadn't seen it before. I was like, oh, so this must be like a season 6 or season 7. And also, it's what gave me the impression that the later seasons weren't very good, because it's not a very good episode. I never really liked it. So it's about this guy who works at a science thingy, and he gets this device that lets him have this holographic image of other people, so he can look like other people basically. And he takes it home, and him and his friend are sort of fucking around. Oh, let's go out into town and pretend to be these hot people. And it starts out like a joke, like his friend, who's a woman, uses it to have sex with this hot guy, and gives the dude like the hot guy's secret, so that he can or scans him so he can look exactly like that particular hot guy that he works with. And of course, the hot guy he works with gets all the promotions, and he gets passed off, and so he becomes very jealous of him. So he basically starts to go out as the hot guy and starts to live his life and pretend to be him. And he causes all sorts of mayhem and trouble, and when things come to a head, he eventually just kills the hot guy and takes over his life. But then, irony of irony, the hot guy was actually a gambler who owed a lot of money to these loan sharks who show up and kill him. Because they all think he's the hot guy. But anyway, it starts off okay. Like, it's a somewhat interesting concept, but I think first of all, they get too preachy into how good looks control society, and ugly people, or people who are not as like attractive get rejected, which there's some merit to that, but I think they're a bit too on the nose with that message and take it to an extreme that doesn't really strike true to me. And plus, like, the person they have playing these quote unquote ugly people are also very attractive. Now, they may not be as attractive as the hot people that they have. Granted, I will grant them that. Like, the main actor who plays the main character in this episode is this guy I've seen in several other films, like Saving Private Ryan and some other various films, and he's not I guess you wouldn't call him like a supermodel. He's not a Brad Pitt type, but he's still not that bad looking. And comparatively, I mean, much better looking than I am. So, and then there's the woman who's playing like the unattractive woman. She was actually very attractive. They just put glasses on her. It's the whole trope. Like, they made fun of this in that movie, now another teen movie. It's like, oh my god, she's so ugly, she's got glasses on. It's a trope they use in a lot of movies where they just put glasses on a woman and said, oh my god, look at how nerdy and unattractive she is. So that's a problem with the episode too, if it's having this whole message about how attractive people control society and the unattractive people are neglected. They have attractive people playing the unattractive people. So and it's just, and the main character, the protagonist, becomes so unlikable in this episode. Like he just, his downfall into becoming obsessed with, I'm passed up because I'm ugly, blah blah blah. He becomes an asshole, and you start to not sympathize with him. So if the message is unattractive people are often passed up, you kind of think it's kind of like the whole nice guys thing. You kind of think, well, actually, it's not because he's unattractive. It's because he's an asshole. He's an entitled asshole. And eventually his best friend leaves him, and I guess they're trying to say it was the device that allowed him to be hot that went to his head, but he didn't seem like, this episode didn't do a good job of making him sympathetic, so you kind of like think that this guy was just an asshole, got what he deserved. And so in that way it fails, and if its message is like to try to say there's more to looks, and looks control too much of society, and people put too much value on attractiveness, it fails because the quote-unquote unattractive person is unsympathetic and someone who you think is an asshole shouldn't get any value whatsoever. And if you look to his best friend, the woman, she's just got glasses on. Anyway, so this episode is a failure. I didn't really like it. So let's get into the next episode, which is Manifest Destiny. Now, this is one of these episodes that I had seen before, but I didn't realize it until I started watching. Like, I look ahead at the episode listing before I watch each season, and when I saw this, it didn't ring any bells. But when I started watching, I was like, wait a second, this looks familiar. So this is a found footage-esque episode, which typically I hate that genre, but I actually kind of like this one. This is actually because found footage, to me, you're gonna do that genre, that's a strike against you already. I think it's really gimmicky. Like, it's first, like, I know it wasn't the first found footage movie ever made, but it's the first one that really started the trend was the Blair Witch Project. And then it became sort of a trend for horror movies to do it. And I think Blair Witch Project, it worked because they kind of really went all in on this method. But then other movies just started to do it as a gimmick. And in certain movies, it seems like they just wanted a way to film cheap and slash the budget. And the found footage method was actually, like, didn't make any sense, and it was contrived, and they were going out of their way to do it, which, to be fair, I did feel that way a little bit with this episode, that it was a little bit contrived. So basically, this episode takes place, in space, in these spaceships, and they have the actor who plays Daniel Jackson on SG-1. Michael Shanks is his name. He's recording this, like, historical, like a log for his ship, and he has sort of the camera on, so he's our sort of point of view as they investigate this derelict ship that was sort of haunted. And now, kind of like this alien presence took over, and, like, the people on this original ship all went crazy and killed each other, and this sort of thing is starting to infect their crew, which consists of just like 4 people, I believe. Now this I know 5 people because one stayed on the ship. But anyway, she goes crazy and blows up their ship, so they're trapped on the haunted ship. But anyway, the plot of it reminds me a hell of a lot of Event Horizon. I think it's for certain is taking inspiration from Event Horizon. About a haunted spaceships and the people slowly start to go insane. It's not so much that like the spaceship itself starts to kill them. You find out that it's these aliens that apparently humanity. Sorry, lost my words. Humanity wiped out. Like the official record, as far as like Michael Shanks and the civilians were concerned, was that it was an uninhabitable planet, and the Earth just like wipes out like these microbes so they can come and terraform it. But apparently, it was inhabited by an intelligent species, and the military were aware of it, and they wiped it out anyway. But this particular species has like these telekinetic powers where they can sort of transfer their beings even after death. So they transfer themselves into the ship, and they start to kill off the crew as revenge for wiping them out. And at the end of the episode, it's revealed that they make their way to Earth, so they're going to wipe out all of humanity on Earth. And in that case, this episode also is very reminiscent of, I think it was the either third or fourth season episode, Relativity Theory, which also is very similar, where humans wiped out these aliens or attacked these aliens and wiped them out, and the aliens like fought back and ended up wiping out Earth. And also in that episode, you had a civilian character who was like the voice of moral reason, who was fighting against it, but they were overruled by the evil military. So it's kind of like the Outer Limits kind of repeating itself in that regard. But despite all that, I kind of liked this episode because I think it did a really good job of having a really eerie sort of feel. And those are my favorite types of horror stories, the ones that are not so much like gory or aliens or monsters popping out and going roar, but the ones that have this high tension, eerie feeling towards it. And I think this episode actually did a good job, and it used the found footage format effectively in order to accomplish that eerie feel where the crew start to go mad. And I dare say it actually did a better job than Event Horizon at that, because Event Horizon got a little silly, gory, over the top towards the end, where this didn't, even though this clearly had a much lower budget. But it's still, I feel like it sometimes having a lower budget can be a good thing, because it makes the creators have to sort of improvise and rely more on like storytelling rather than fall back on special effects. And in this way, I think it actually worked in its favor. So actually, all in all, this is a pretty effective horror story. I mean, I wouldn't call it one of the better episodes of the show, but it worked for me. It was effective. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called Breaking Point. Let's see. So, I'm trying to remember I barely remember what happens in this episode. I guess it speaks to how forgettable it is. It's something like this dude time travel, like he discovered time travel. I remember this episode. He time travels like 2 days in the future, and he sees that his wife has been murdered. So and the police are after him. So he sees like the murderer running away, and it's actually himself. But he thinks, oh, maybe there's no way I could do it. Maybe it wasn't me. Maybe that I was just there to investigate. I don't know. But anyway, he travels back to his present, where he left 2 days before to try to prevent the murder. But basically everything he does is just reinforcing the murder, because you find out once he travels back that his marriage is falling apart, and his wife is going to leave him, and the whole time he's going a bit crazy, like, I gotta save you, and he tells her about the time traveling thing, and she just dismisses him as crazy, and that he needs this psychological help, and so it's the feud between, he starts to become jealous of her being around other people, and you really see it becomes really, really predictable that everything he's doing is leading up to him killing her, which of course is what happens. So I do so this is what I would refer to as type 1 time travel, or at least this part of it. I'm not even get to the end of it is a whole nother ball of wax, but let me talk about this part first before I get to the end. Now, type 1 time travel is sort of like the 12 Monkeys Lost Dark for at least its first 2 seasons, where whatever happened. If you travel back in time and do something has already been done, so whatever you try to do, it's actually what's going to happen is going to happen. And I suppose actually the ending sticks to it, but it sticks to the more the course correction. Like in the 12 Monkeys way of doing it, like if, say, the grandfather paradox, if you travel back in time and kill your own grandfather, what would happen? And 12 Monkeys supposes that you couldn't kill your grandfather because you didn't, because you're alive, so it's proof that you can't. So no matter what you try to do, you're not going to be able to kill your grandfather. But then there's something like Lost, which kind of presupposes that if you kill your grandfather, something's going to course correct. Like, I don't know how in that specific, that doesn't work for that specific scenario. But say you went back to, alright, here's a better example. Say you went back to kill baby Hitler to prevent Hitler from happening. So in the sort of Lost type, type 1 time travel, the time stream would course correct. So if you kill Hitler, there's going to be another dictator in Germany who's just going to come and do the exact same thing and take the place of Hitler. So it's slightly different than the 12 Monkeys thing. The 12 Monkeys would be, you can't kill Hitler because Hitler didn't die, therefore you can't change what happened. Whereas there's another school of thought, well, yeah, sure, you could kill Hitler, but the time stream is going to course correct. And that's where the ending of this episode comes into play. So for the first part of this episode, it was kind of like the 12 Monkeys thing, where it's obvious that everything he was doing was going to lead up to him killing his wife, and he was actually causing things to call into place. But what happens at the end of the episode after he kills his wife, because it was an accident, but he still killed his wife, so he goes back further in the past to try to prevent this from happening. So he travels back to the moment before he met his wife and kills himself so that he couldn't kill his wife in the future. But then we find out that because he never met her at the diner, she was depressed and she killed herself. So him meeting her actually saved her life. And so the fact that he never met her, she committed suicide. So it's like that's the second kind of course correction, that she was destined to die because if he didn't kill her, she would simply kill herself. Which it's somewhat interesting. I found it maybe a little cheesy in the context of this episode, like the way they played it out. And plus, I kind of found this episode a bit tedious because I kind of knew, except for that ending, which I didn't think was all that great. But for the majority of the episode, I knew what was going to happen. It was so obvious that he was causing the event. So sometimes I really do like Type 1 time travel, like 12 Monkeys and Dark are really great examples of it. And some of the earlier episodes of Lost, not talking about the later ones. But I don't think they made it interesting enough here. It was just too predictable. Oh, and the movie Time Crimes, that's another really great example of Type 1 time travel. Anywho, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is The Beholder. This episode was actually more interesting than I thought it would be, because at first it seemed really silly to me. So it's about this guy who's a college professor who's blind, who gets this technology, has this that lets him see again. But apparently there's like this government agent who gets this thing from space that allowed him to see again. I'm not sure how that works, but apparently it's all part of this, top secret plan to get him to perceive this being who is out of the perception realm of normal human beings. But because he has this like stuff in him from outer space, it allows him to perceive her. And at first, he thinks he's crazy, and the psychologist is trying to say he's just hallucinating. But then it turns out that this really shady government official comes in and is like, and reveals that he's actually seeing her, that she really exists. Now, that government agent is played by an actor who played a Goa'uld on Stargate SG-1. If you're not familiar with SG-1, the Goa'uld are the super evil villains of that show. And so he always plays the bad guy. So as soon as he showed up, I'm like, asshole, that's going to be the villain. And also the way the actor portrayed, because sometimes actors can switch, who typically play villains can sometimes play good. Like Ronnie Cox, I think I had a few examples of him actually playing a relatable guy, and he did a good job. But with this actor, he was actually playing him like the same way he would play a villain. So as soon as I saw him, like, yep, that's the bad guy of the episode. And it turns out it is, because he's just trying to use the blind guy to capture the alien from another, from the other dimension, and like do evil experiments on her. And the alien is like this really hot chick that the blind guy falls in love with, and so they trick him into getting her trapped in this by the evil government guy, and they start to capture her, but he manages to trick them and get her out of there, and then he gives up his sight in order to save her, because he knows that they're gonna, if he keeps taking the medicine that allows him to see, they're gonna use him to get to her, so he stops taking the medicine. There are cheesy elements to it, like the whole way that she appears to him, and that she just happens to be really hot. And he goes, oh no, it was a bit silly, but I actually really liked this episode. I thought the ending was actually quite powerful, that he had to give up his sight in order to save this woman that he barely knew but cared for. So yeah, actually, surprisingly, I thought this was a really effective episode, so I really liked it. Anyway, let's get to the next episode, which is called Seeds of Destruction, and boy did this episode suck. And I looked this episode up on IMDb, and apparently it's the second to last lowest rated episode of the show, which makes sense to me. So this it's about like evil genetically engineered crops, and how they start to like kill people, and they get this virus comes off where they like get all these tumors and die fast, and it's due to this genetically engineered crop. But the company, like the whole town, is dependent on the money that comes in from this crop, and the company that owns it, of course, is denying. Everyone is like trying to shut down the scientist who's trying to prove that it's the crop that's killing people. And the whole company is like a conspiracy to sort of keep this under wraps. Now, I kind of, like, here's the thing about this whole genetic engineering thing. Like, I often speak up against it personally. But that's mainly because, it's not because of the science. It has nothing to do with the science. Not the science that's the problem. It's the corporations that use the science in order just to save money. And they would do this, and I don't trust them to do this at the expense of health, at the human well-being, which I am absolutely certain they will. So this is a message I can get behind, but the way they execute it, like, is terrible. First of all, when at the start of the episode, when the disease first started out, because this old farmer, like, he instantly died and like had all these tumors all over, and then several other people are getting it. And as soon as like the second or third person got, I was okay. They're gonna call the CDC. Actually, after the first person got, I'm like, okay, they're gonna call the CDC, right? Because this is like a super virus type thing that the CDC should come in and like quarantine the whole town and investigate. And then after like second and third death, I'm like, okay, now they're gonna call the CDC. But they never called the CDC because that's not what the plot they wanted to tell. They didn't want to have a scientific investigation of this virus. They wanted to make it be about one lone scientist trying to fight the huge evil corporation that was trying to keep this under wraps. And it actually made no sense. It was the dumbest thing ever for... They should have could just fucking... They lost me as soon as they didn't call the CDC for this like super virus that like instantly causes tumors and allows people to transform and die. Like the CDC should have been there like instantly, like first indication. And so like the fact that no one in that town was taking it serious when it was obviously this super deadly virus, regardless of how it was caused, you could just forget about the whole genetically engineered crop thing. The fact that people were getting this like instant tumors and becoming monsters and dying, that's the whole town should have been under quarantine immediately. So it lost me there. And then like the actual characters in this episode were flat and silly and uninteresting. Like the main protagonist was married, a married woman who was having an affair with the guy who's clearly the villain who represented the corporation, and so that made me have no respect for her. Not so much that she was cheating on her husband, but that the fact that she was cheating on her husband with an obvious asshole who's the clear villain. So it kind of made me lose any respect for any of these characters. It was just a terribly written episode that it was just unbelievable. It failed at every turn, so it was a terrible episode. Anyway, then we get into the next episode, which is Simon Says, and this episode was fine, I guess. It's about this father who lost a son when he was younger, but he becomes an old man, and they have I think it's his niece that's like taking care of him and who he's really close to, but she's like a grown woman who has her own issues because she has a daughter who her ex-husband is trying to take her away, and currently her ex-husband has custody over her, which to me was kind of an irrelevant side plot, but I guess it comes into play a little bit. But regardless, this old guy creates a robot and like somehow implants the consciousness of his dead son into this, like, it's not even like a realistic looking robot. It doesn't look like a human being. It's obvious like a robot thingy, but it has the personality of his dead son because he somehow implanted it in the son. And at first, like, the niece is like really supportive, but then as this robot starts being really creepy, like for example, it kills their cat when it just tries to pet it. And so I thought that we're gonna go on a sort of cliche, the robot becomes evil and starts killing people, but thankfully they didn't go in that direction. But they went into another cheesy direction where apparently the old guy who created the robot was stealing parts from the place he worked at, and so when his boss found out, the boss tried to like physically like steal the robot away, like, this is our company's property because you used stolen parts to build them. And a huge fight ensued where the old guy killed his boss. And so the niece is like, I gotta report this to the police because I can't like get in trouble because then I'll lose my daughter. And so we have to play this completely legally. And the old guy's like, no, don't call the police. And like, no, she's like, I have to. So she goes to call the police, but when she gets back, they find that the old guy killed himself and implanted his consciousness into a robot. So now there were just two robots, the old guy and the son, both in robots. It was okay. Like, I don't think this was a terrible episode. I mean, it was a bit cheesy. particularly that ending. And plus, like, even though they didn't go in the way I was fearing they would go, it was still kind of cliche, like the stuff with the robot boy killing the cat when he was just trying to pet it. As a cat person myself, I didn't appreciate that. But, yeah, it was fine. It was an okay episode. Whatever. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called Stasis. Now, this, I did really, really like this episode. I never seen this or heard of this episode before, and I loved it, quite frankly. So it takes place in the future where resources are limited and there's overpopulation. And it's a very interesting concept for a dystopian story. So basically, half the population of these worker class have to go in, and that takes up the majority of the population, mind you. They have to go into stasis. So half the population is in stasis while the other half is working, and then they switch turns. So it's like every week or every other day or something, half the population has to remain in stasis while the other half work, and they have these pairs that are working on the same project. So while one's awake, they can continue the work, and the other goes to sleep, and the other one wakes up. And the episode follows a pair that switches off, that's working on the same project, a man and a woman, and they fall in love with each other even though they never actually see each other because one's always asleep while the other one's awake. But they leave messages for each other. It was supposed to be to work on the same project, but then they start like having intimate conversations, personal details. And they're both friends with this supervisor guy who's like part of the elite, because there's an elite class, so it's got that sort of classism aspect to it, who are like super rich and they never have to hibernate, and they kind of treat the workers like shit. And he, for the most of the episode, you think that he's a typical elite asshole and he has a crush on the woman, but she's actually in love with the other dude who's asleep while she's awake. And the other dude is like good friends with that guy, and they start to have tensions when he realizes, as such, become a love triangle when he realizes that that he's actually in love with the same woman that he's in love with. And this is plot, there's this like whole underground that's trying to fight against this hibernation thing. Like there's a politician who speaks out against it, and she's immediately arrested, and so because the elite want to control everything. And then you find out there's this evil plot that the elite have to actually, because they're talking about relocating half the population, but you find out they're just going to kill them and use their body for energy to create more power and energy. So yeah, they're a pretty evil elite class. But you keep hearing about how there's someone in the underground who's working with, who's in the elite, who's working with the underground. But eventually the two main characters, like the dude breaks the woman out of hibernation and they run off with the underground, but they end up being betrayed by who they thought was in the underground. He's actually working with the elite. And then it turns out at the end that their friend, who was the asshole who's from the elite, he's actually the one who was working with the underground. And I gotta be honest, even though he was probably the most likely candidate for being the one who worked with the underground, I that surprised me. Like, I didn't see that coming, because I think the episode actually did a really good job of sort of painting him as like this asshole who didn't give a shit. And plus, it's kind of the cliche of the love triangle, and they sort of really subverted that whole love triangle cliche by making him be the ally. So he actually ended up being okay with the other two going off and being lovers, because it was more important to him to make sure that they stopped this whole. So this huge revolution happened where they overthrew the elite, and that woman who was arrested for speaking out against him, she became the new leader. And they got rid of the whole hibernation aspect, and they said, "Oh, we'll just have to get by," because apparently, like, they did the whole hibernation thing to save resources was like years and centuries ago or whatever, and it was no longer relevant. But it was just a way for the elite to keep their power and keep their power over the worker class, which is a message that I completely get behind, and I think has a lot of relevance for modern times. So yeah, I really liked this episode. I thought it was a really effective. It surprised me. It was a really good episode. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is not a good episode, which is called Down to Earth. Now, I'm starting to realize that, again, making my analogy from the Outer Limits to the X-Files, because I wasn't aware of this at the time, but the Outer Limits was really trying to be like the X-Files in a lot of ways. Not all the time, but in many ways, yes. And one of the aspects of the X-Files is that it would have a comedy episode at least one every season that is usually a fan favorite, which I disagree with, but I don't want to get into that. And so, The Outer Limits, I'm starting to realize in its latest, it didn't do this for like the first 2 or 3 seasons, but then it started doing this where every year it would have a comedy episode, and consistently, and again, this is something the fan base agrees with me on for this time, they're the worst. They're some of the worst episodes of each season. The Outer Limits cannot do comedy episodes correctly, and so this one is about like a sci-fi alien convention of people who think aliens are coming to Earth, and they have this reported evidence in aliens there, but some of them think it's fake and some of them think it isn't, but it turns out to be real. And it has the guy, the main actor is a dude from Whose Line Is It Anyway? Who's a decent comedian. I like him, but they can't do comedy in the Outer Limits. It always comes off as terribly written. It's not particularly funny, and this episode in particular is really goofy, and I feel like it was kind of vicious towards like the nerd community, and sort of portraying all the people like morons and idiots who believed aliens existed, and belittling them, and yeah. It's just not a good episode. I don't really have much else to say about it. Oh yeah, the twist ending where the guy from Whose Line Is It Anyway actually turned out to be the alien. That was dumb. It was dumb. Anywho, let's get into the next episode, which is Inner Child. Now, this is an episode that started out good until it started to get a bit ridiculous. So it was about this woman who gets mugged and she nearly dies. Actually, she does die, but somehow she comes back to life, and the doctors are sort of puzzled by this. How can she still be alive? Now, that aspect of it I thought was interesting, but then they started to get into this whole, she had like a twin that died at birth but was like still alive and kind of attached to her spine or whatever, and her twin started taking over her life, and she would have periods where she'd black out and the twin would go out into town and do all this crazy shit and sort of fuck with her life, which I think is kind of silly. I think that's kind of a silly concept, and I really don't think they sold it very well in this episode, because the way they had the conversations, they tried to play it at the end like she was at peace with her twin taking over, which I didn't buy. It seemed to come out of nowhere, because most of the episode it was like this fight. It was like this evil twin. Oh, get out of my body! She's trying to take over my body. She's trying to kill me. But at the end, it's just like, okay, I love you. I didn't buy that. She seemed like the evil twin, and the whole time she's like, no, I'm trying to take over your body and kill you because I love you. Don't buy it. Anyway, so, to this episode, I say. So then we get to the next episode, which is called Glitch. I enjoyed this episode. It's about, it just actually had a really good cold opening, because it was just like a married couple reminiscing, and you thought, oh, this is going to be another sort of one where there's a couple and some weird sci-fi shit happens, and but they jump like right into it. They end the cold opening with the dude like freaking out and realizing that he's an android. And then the rest of the episode goes in where the wife is just like working with the project and pretending to be his wife, not really his wife. He's just an android who thinks he's a human. But then you find out that this military, they're training this android to be like assassins and murderers and work for the military. But the guy who originally created them for a different purpose. And so he embedded these programs into the android that's making him and wake up and defy his military oppressors. And the assistant who was pretending to be his wife, you find out that like she's working with the military too, but then she rebels against the military and joins him, and they run off together. Then you find out that she's actually an android too. And they go to the original creator's dead, but they go to his wife, who explains everything to them, and they end up like, you think that the military caught up to him and killed his wife and have him captured, but he escapes and he rebuilds the wife, and they go off to build an android society. I like this. I thought it was a good episode. It kept me captivated. I thought it was well structured. They reveal certain things at certain times that really worked. The villain, it's funny because the villain is an actor I've seen before. I can't recall at the moment, but I know he was in an earlier episode of The Outer Limits where he actually played like a really nice guy. So it's weird seeing him playing like the villain this time. But yeah, this whole episode worked for me. I didn't think it was like amazing or anything like that, but it was good. So then we get to the next episode, which is called Decompression. So this is one of those episodes which I had seen before, but I didn't remember until I started watching it. As soon as I started watching it, I saw the lead character was the same actor who played Captain Sheridan from Babylon 5. And he was playing a politician, and they were getting on an airplane, and I was like, wait, this seems really, really familiar. I'm pretty sure I've seen this before. And then, like, this visitor from the future appears, and it's like, everyone on this plane is going to die, da, da, da. And I was like, oh, yeah, this episode. Then it all came coming back to me, and I'd definitely seen it before. And I actually like it. I think this is another really strong episode, another good episode. It's funny because when I reviewed Babylon 5, and of course all the Babylon 5 fans disagreed with me, but I talked about how I didn't like the actor who played Captain Sheridan. They came off as too much as a handsome man. Now, I think people didn't quite understand what I meant by handsome man. I don't mean because they were comparing to modern, like, hunks, like talking like Jack from Lost or something like that. But that's not what I mean by handsome man. That's more like a hunky hot guy is what I would call that. Handsome man, I think of more like older actors from like the 70s or 80s who had that sort of veneer of being really rich and stuck up and, oh, I'm a handsome man. If you ever seen like the skit from Saturday Night Live where it was like, I'm a handsome man, they had Alec Baldwin come in, I'm a handsome actor. Like, I wouldn't even classify Alec Baldwin in that, honestly. I think of more like Billy D. Williams and other sort of like, I'm trying to think of other examples, but more like the cheesy handsome man type actors. And I couldn't buy him in the role of Captain Sheridan because I kept thinking he's a handsome man. But the funny thing is, I totally bought him in the role of a politician, of a stereotypical politician. I think because that handsome man trope actually fits the politician trope perfectly, and particularly the kind of politician that he played. So I actually thought, even though I still, to this day, no matter what Babylon 5 fans say, will still stand by my opinion that he was miscast in that show. I think he was perfect casting here. He really sold the part. So basically the whole episode is this woman time traveler for the future appears only to him, so no one else in the plane can see him, so everyone else on the plane thinks he's like starting to go crazy and lose his mind, but she keeps popping up like all the time and saying, hey, this plane's gonna crash, you need to listen to me, hey, quit fucking around. Whenever he tries to ignore her and like play business as usual, she will show her peer like again and be really angry, like, what are you fucking around for? You're about to die, don't you understand that? Everyone on this plane is dead, your head's gonna be ripped off from your body. And she keeps warning him, so eventually he's like, alright, fine, what do I need to do? And she says, well, jump out the airplane and we'll use our time travel technology to snatch you. Now when she said this, that's when I started to suspect her. I'm like, are you serious? And of course, like, his reaction to be fair to the episode, was also like, no, I'm not going to jump out the airplane. But then she keeps re-insisting and talking about how grisly his death was going to be, and how there's going to be a dystopian future if he doesn't survive, because he needs to be the president to usher in a really great future, and if he dies, then there'll be this dystopian dark future, so he has to survive. And so eventually he does the thing that she asks, and takes the gun and jumps out the airplane. And then you find out that she was just lying to him the whole time, and that he, in fact, was the evil dictator who brought on the dark dystopia. And so she purposely, but the plane wasn't actually going to crash. She was lying to him, manipulated him so he would kill himself, so that he wouldn't be alive to be this evil dictator, and thus save the future that way. It was really creepy, too, the whole way it was revealed, because he jumped out the airplane, and then they showed the time travelers sort of have him in the future, and he thinks he's saved, and she explains everything to him, and he's like, well, if I'm such an evil guy, why did you save me? She's like, what makes you think I saved you? And then he goes right back to falling to his death, and then he dies. Although I think I gotta call unrealistic, because they show his dead body on the car. But if he jumped from an airplane at that high of a height, I think his body would kind of be smushed, or at least fall apart. But whatever, who knows? But yeah, that was so I actually quite liked it. It was a bit of a twisted episode, and I did like the twist that because they kind of sold it like. I think that it was really well written, so really it could go either way. Like, the politician was neither very obvious a very good one or a very bad one, and he talked the only policies that they really got into was where he was talking about no one should have privacy in the age of the internet, that the privacy is an outdated thing and people just need to get over it. So I think that was the hint that, hey, that's actually not a very good policy, and that could lead to a totalitarian government who believes that people aren't entitled to privacy. And so that was kind of a hint that they were dropping there. I mean, he seemed like a nice enough guy. I mean, he was having an affair, but that's very stereotypical, especially in television and movies. Politicians always have affairs. So that wasn't really a strike against him. But, yeah, but when they did reveal that he was actually the evil dictator who brought about the dystopian future, it all tracked. It all fit, and it made sense. And in fact, that was why she was appealing to his egotism about, oh, you're going to be this great president, you need to save yourself. And in fact, once he did jump out the plane, she's like, I knew your selfishness would want you to just save yourself and not give a fuck about anyone else on the plane. It's kind of a nice little twist on the terror at whatever 1,000 feet, the Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner going, there's something on the way. It's kind of like, because someone has this prediction of death and doom on the plane, but no one else there believes him. But to me, it was a lot more interesting, that whole twist of this being this evil dictator that they must kill. Now, so I really liked this episode, but I wouldn't say it's like an amazing or one of the best of the show, because it did drag for a bit for most of it, particularly the parts with like the campaign manager, and they had these side plots of them being an asshole that they're gonna get, and this reporter who kept trying to drill him. It seemed like they were just trying to fill out the runtime of the episode. They needed something to do. Ultimately, didn't really matter when it came to the end of it. The end of it was all about the time travelers. So that's why I wouldn't say it's an amazing episode, but it's definitely a good one. It was definitely a strong episode. In fact, I was like really fighting myself back and forth whether I should give this an 8 or a 9, and it kind of lies in between. Like, if I did decimal points, it would probably be an 8.7 or an 8.8 or something like that. But ultimately, I went with an 8, but I consider it a very strong 8. Like, if I compared it to other 8s of the series, it would probably be on top of all of them. It's nearly a 9. But yeah, it's a really good episode. So we go from a really good episode to a really bad episode. An episode called "A Bad," and it has recognizable actors such as Keith David. Keith David's been in so many things. I'm trying to remember what he's most known for. The Thing, They Live, Pitch Black. I haven't really. That's not where I know him from. I'm trying to think of the one thing I know him from. I was thinking, is he from Aliens? But no, he's not from Aliens. That was a different guy, because this episode is kind of trying to rip off Aliens. So that's maybe why I thought he was from Aliens, but it wasn't him. But anyway, I can't find it in his filmography. But I know I've seen him in a lot of stuff before. And there's also Corbin Bernstein from L.A. Law, who I recognize. So you think, oh, these decent actors, will be a decent episode. This episode sucked. It was, even though it had decent actors, it had bad acting in it. So this leads me to believe, if ever I see anything that has good actors but there's bad acting, then that tells me that it's a combination. It's either or it's a combination. In most cases, I think this is a combination of bad writing and bad directing. In fact, looking at this episode, I would lean more towards the bad writing side of things. Like, if people are giving shitty dialogue, even good actors can only do so much with it. And so, yeah, so it was like taking place on a spaceship, and they find this, and this corporations like run all of humanity, which is a concept I find interesting, but they didn't really do anything interesting with it. Like, they had this revolutionary who was fighting against corporations, who apparently like this cult leader, mass murderer type, and he tries to corrupt the crew or whatever. And like all of his like corrupting the crew and the crew starting to fracture from within was very poorly written, and I didn't really buy any of it, and it just came off as like super cheesy, barely an inconvenience. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, so I didn't. It was just a poorly written episode. It didn't track. The plot didn't really make any sense. It was poorly structured. Anything else you wanted to say about it just did not work. So the next episode is The Grid, and this is another one of those episodes which was meh. It was okay. Like, it started out really good and really interesting, but the ending got kind of cheesy. So this is about. It had a really good hook at the start, because it had this woman who was going crazy and trying to kill her husband, and then the police are up and like, oh, thank God the police are here. They're going to protect this man from this crazy woman, but instead they help her try to kill the husband, which was a very interesting hook. And then the brother, so that they do kill him, and the brother of the dead guy shows up in town, and he slowly starts to reveal that there's these like towers that are like mind controlling the whole town, and so the whole town is being controlled by this evil AI, and so that's why they tried to kill that dude, because the dude was trying to shut the AI down. And so it's about the brother basically learning about this and trying to take up his brother's work to try to finish off and destroy this evil AI. But the whole town is against him, and they have this young girl who apparently appears to be his ally, trying to help him out and give him advice. But it turns out that the young girl was being controlled by the evil AI all along. It was all part of the evil AI's plan to actually get this guy to insert this program that he thought would destroy it, but it would actually in fact make it stronger. And so the episode ends with him like being able to temporarily disable the evil AI so he can leave and get out of town, but he returns to his hometown to find that there's towers there. Dun dun dun! The evil AI is there, so it can mind controls his wife to kill him. I thought that was really cheesy ending. I'm sorry. That was so cheesy when he went back to his hometown, his wife, and they saw the towers. His wife's like, oh, I'm like, come on. I personally actually would have found this episode more interesting if he had actually defeated the AI. Because the Outer Limits can actually go either way. Sometimes it does have happy endings, and sometimes it has the dark, ironic dun-dun-dun. And here's the thing. Sometimes I think the dark, ironic dun-dun-dun ending does really work, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they just should have went the happy ending route, and I'm sorry, I think this is one of those examples, just my opinion. Anyway, but not a terrible episode, but still kind of, yeah. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called Revival. This is Gary Busey. It's funny. Actually, I think he was the highlight of this episode because it dealt with like these overly religious, like faith healers, and pretending to heal people, but then this evil alien comes and he like is the apprentice for Gary Busey, who's the faith healer, and he uses his like alien powers to heal people, but of course his agenda is like he's murdering young girls like every night. So his agenda is like these alien invaders who want to take over the earth or something, and Gary Busey finds out about it, but the alien uses his powers to sort of frame Gary Busey for murder, and Gary Busey sacrifices himself to kill this demon, but then of course the demon's mother is still there, and so she takes up the work, and it reveals they hold him, like the alien dude, up as the new Jesus, like savior, which I don't buy. I don't buy that there will ever be, I mean, maybe in a small sort of cult way, but this episode was definitely implying it would become a major religion, which religions have to fester for thousands of years before they can become major. Yes, I did say that. Thank you, Scientologists and fucking Mormons. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, so I suppose it could become as big as one of those religions, but still, that's not enough to sort of control all of society, which is, I think, what was implied by the ending. So I'm not really into religion either way, so I didn't really dig this episode. So, yeah, not really my thing. So now we get to the next episode, which is Gettysburg. Now, this is one of the episodes I have seen before. It was on the DVD, the time travel DVD, which is where I first saw it, and I saw it several times because of that. And I remember really not liking this episode. And when I first started watching it, I was like, well, why did I not like it? It actually seemed pretty decent. But here's the thing about this episode. This is one of those episodes, and it's more frustrating than an out-and-out bad episode. It's that it could have been good. Like, the beginning was good. It had a strong foundation, but then it kind of just failed. It kind of just had a terrible ending that didn't really satisfy what it was. So basically, this episode's about Civil War reenactors being taken back in time to end the actual Civil War, to see what it was actually like to be in the Civil War. And it's about two friends. One of them was pretending to be Union, the other one was pretending to be Confederate. And when they travel back in time to the actual Civil War, they're picked up by the Confederacy. So the Union guy is seen as like an enemy prisoner, whereas the guy dressed as a Confederate soldier is seen as a bit suspicious because he was with Union soldiers. So here's the thing about this episode is that it sets up for a lot of things that it never pays off. That's why I mean it had like potential. It was like it's setting. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing to set up for. I wonder how they're going to pay this off. And the answer is they don't. It's like they have a Chekhov's gun that never goes off and never plays any relevance. And plus, what the actual ending ends up being is really cheesy. Now, this also it features the same character from the Tribunal episode, the time traveler. God damn it! What the hell was his name? Preston. I don't know. What? Prentice. That's his name. Prentice. And it's funny because that same actor has actually appeared in tons of episodes of The Outer Limits. So he must be a Vancouver actor. But anyway. He's making his reappearance as the same character he played in Tribunal, which was an amazing episode. But in this episode, like, he comes off as an idiot. First of all, he seems really reckless and like no regard for human life, because he transports these three guys back to the Civil War. Now, granted, one of the three he didn't mean to be. He like photobombed his photo, but the photo was actually a time machine, so it sent him back in time. And he was dressed as a Union soldier, so he didn't take it seriously when they were actually in the Civil War, so he got killed. And so this Prentice guy seemed to have no regard that he just murdered this guy needlessly. He didn't even need the guy, and plus he was putting these other two people in danger. And so he keeps talking about, oh, there's this mission. You have to complete your mission before I send you back. And you wonder what this mission is. The Confederate guy thinks his mission is to help the Confederacy win the war and change history, which, of course, that's not Prentice's idea. That's not what he wants to do. But it turns out that the Confederate guy, you know, the present day one who was transported back in time, he eventually in the future year of 2013 will murder the president, who's an African American president who like buries the Confederate flag for good or something like that. And so Prentice's idea is to take him back in time to see what the actual Civil War was like, so he could see that war was hell, so he changed his mind. That's a stupid plan. That's a stupid plan, and of course it doesn't work. In fact, it just reasserts his like devotion towards the Confederacy. And he desperately tries to get the Confederacy to win the war, but no one will listen to him because they think he's just a lowly private. And in fact, he runs across his ancestor, who he touts as, I did this in the name of my ancestor, and finds out his ancestor is a coward who doesn't really believe in the cause. Which I kind of like that aspect to it. But the whole thing about Princess's plan being, let's transport this guy so he can change his mind so he won't kill the president. The president was supposed to be like this one of the greatest presidents of all time. He has a flagrant disregard for life. That one dude dies, he doesn't seem to care. The other dude's life is in danger, he doesn't care. And his recklessness puts his life in danger when the Confederates takes his time machine away from him, his camera. And it shows, so he's fucking terrible. He's useless. He's like a terrible time traveler, so it kind of ruins his character from Tribunal. But getting back to the point I was making about Chekhov's gun that never goes off. So the friend of the Confederate guy who's dressed as a Union soldier, he has this history book on him that has like the history of the Civil War. So when he's back in Civil War times, it's like the sports almanac from Back to the Future. It predicts what's going to happen in this time period. And so if anyone in this time period got their hands on it, they could potentially alter history. And so that's a very interesting concept to introduce. And they do absolutely nothing with it. So they end up like the Confederacy band that they're with takes over this house of a Union supporter of this woman. Her husband's out fighting in the Union, but they take over her house, and she gives birth. And the guy from the future who's dressed as a Union soldier, who just so happens to be a medic, helps this woman give birth, and she has a glimpse at the history book, and then she gives it back to him. So those are several Chekhov's guns there, and I was like, ooh, this is interesting setup. I wonder how they're going to pay it off. Answer, they don't. What? Because here's the thing. First of all, the whole giving birth thing. One can assume that because since that Confederate band that took over her house didn't have a medic, he had to serve the role as their medic. and he helped her gave birth. One could assume that in the original timeline, without him there, that she could have died during childbirth without anyone with any medical knowledge there to help her give birth. And so there's this great storytelling potential there. You could say that because he helped give birth, that created a new family line, that created like this amazing hero or something, or that could be his own ancestor. You could have like a grandfather paradox type thing, that he was always meant to help his own grandfather come into the world or something like that, but instead they do absolutely nothing. And then the other sort of Chekhov's gun that they just ignore is the history book. She reads the history book, and now she has knowledge of the future, and nothing happens with that. Absolutely nothing happens with it. You could say that she could like tell someone or changes the future or something like that, but nothing happens. It's just, in the whole episode, the whole point is like to save this one president, which I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how important this president is. Whoop-de-doo, it's just one guy. And Princess like just heartlessly kills all of these people and puts these other people's lives in danger just to save this one president guy, who ends up, by the way, he ends up being assassinated anyway. Even though the Confederate guy who was supposed to assassinate him, he actually dies during the Civil War thanks to Prentice's reckless use of life. But it turns out that they accidentally transport like this Confederate colonel who was going insane, played by Meatloaf, and they accidentally transport him back into the exact time where the that president guy was giving his speech. So he ends up being the one assassinating him. That was stupid. I'm sorry. There's no other way around it. That was stupid. So this episode just ultimately is very, very frustrating. I also got to point out that this episode correctly predicted that there would be an African American president in 2013. So kudos for that. Although I don't know if you would call Obama one of the greatest presidents of all time. I guess some hardcore Obama supporters would, but not the general public, I don't think. Anywho, so this episode fails. Like, there's a lot of strong fun, and it makes me feel like this episode either went through probably a combination of both. It probably went through rewrites and was rushed before they could actually come up, because it seems like they had this strong foundation set up, and they had these Chekhov's guns that were there to be paid off. But I think like someone else came in and finished it or rewrote it, or was like, fuck that, let's not pay that off, and instead came up with the ending that didn't at all justify this, and it turned Prentice into an idiotic, bumbling character with no regard for life. So yeah, I didn't like this episode. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called Something About Harry. Now, this did come out after Something About Mary. I believe that was 99, this was 2000, so it's obviously a play on that. Or at least the title is anyway. The actual episode has nothing to do with it. It's about Judd Nelson playing this guy who's like killing off these people and evaporating their bodies, and he rents out a guest house, and a mother with her own only son, who's played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And as soon as I saw him, I was like, hey, that's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, because he was a young actor who was in Third Rock from the Sun, but of course in later years he became a well-known movie star. He's been in stuff like Inception and a lot of these romantic comedies and whatnot, and so he's a fairly well-known actor now. But this is kind of, I hadn't seen anything where from this time period in his life, because it's kind of in between when he was a child star to when he was like a big movie star. So it was kind of like when he was a teenager, and I didn't actually see much of him, so at first it took me a while to recognize him. And of course when this came out, it was probably just known as the kid who was in Third Rock from the Sun, but it turns out he's one of the more well-known celebrities in retrospect who was in The Outer Limits. But as for the episode itself, it's lame. It's kind of lame. It didn't, It was basically about it was the same plot about the young teenage boy who suspects this guy of being an evil guy, and it turns out that he's actually a good guy who works for the government, and he's killing these aliens, and it turns out his own mother is one of these aliens, and blah, 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 and he accidentally gets this guy killed, but then he becomes like an alien hunter and starts working with his partner, the Judd Nelson's partner. But yeah, stupid episode. Not the worst thing ever, but nah. Anyway, next episode is I lost my place. This is one called Zigzag. I like this episode. I want to love this episode, but I can't. It's funny because it's actually rated pretty lowly on IMDb, which I don't think is pretty fair. I actually thought it was a pretty good episode. If I were to guess, I would guess that it was based off of a cyberpunk short story, but it's not. It appears to be original. And it's hard to describe. It's an interesting concept because it's about this dystopian future where everyone's information is controlled by this organization. So it's about these hackers who try to destroy it and make it so lives aren't so dependent. And it's about everyone's livelihood is in this chips, and the chip is implanted in arms tells you who it is, and there's this guy who's a strong supporter of this system. His chip is saying that he's actually this infamous hacker who tried to destroy the system, and so he loses everything that he has. He ends up joining forces with the hacker group, but it turns out, you find out the big twist at the end, is that it was this infamous hacker all along. It was him, because the other hackers didn't think it was him. They thought it was just some asshole corporate guy with the hacker's chip in him somehow, but it turns out it was the original hacker, and he invented, they thought he was dead, but apparently he faked his death, and he invented this person that turned out to be the pro system guy. He invented him. He was actually just a figment. So it has Total Recall touches there, and so it's very intriguing. But the main thing about this episode, which I think it's a gimmick I don't think that quite worked, I don't think they quite earn it, is that it happens in reverse order. So the first, the teaser, the first scene of the whole episode is kind of towards the end. It's not the absolute end, but it's towards the end. But then after that, the episode starts going backwards. It goes an hour, then 2 hours, and then days, and years. And each scene takes place before the previous scene. So it's kind of like a memento effect. And yes, I checked. This episode came out around the same time as Memento, now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, it doesn't do as well as Memento. The way Memento did it was perfect, and it was just a masterpiece in my opinion. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Definitely my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. But the way it's done here, it's nowhere near as earned or as well used as Memento. It seems more like a gimmick, and part of me feels like the episode actually would have been better had they not done it in this. It seemed like the whole point of having it in reverse order was so they could have this big reveal at the end of the episode when they go further back in time and reveal that the Frank Whaley, by the way, he's the actor who plays the main character. He, from Pulp Fiction, he appeared in an episode, one of my favorite episodes of The Outer Limits in season 1. But anyway, they reveal that Frank Whaley's character actually was the original hacker all along, that he created the persona of this corporate guy just so he could lay dormant and destroy the system from the inside. Because you might be like, well, how come none of the other hackers recognize him? It's because they didn't actually know his face. They just knew him by name and reputation and communicated with him online. Yeah. So that's the thing. I want to like this episode because it's an interesting concept. I could feel the style of this episode coming through. And I did like the twist. I thought it was good. And it has a Fight Club-esque ending where they do actually destroy, and everyone dies in the explosion, so they commit suicide in order to destroy all this information that allows the company or the corporation, whoever, to control everyone, which I like. But some of the acting was horrible. Like the other hackers, they were mostly played by other, must be Vancouver actors, because I recognize them in being in various things. I can't pinpoint any of them except for this one dude who definitely played the Tok'ra guy in SG-1. He was like the main Tok'ra guy who had a romance with Samantha Carter. And he doesn't do a good job in this episode. They all come off as really tacky hackers, like the typical like Hollywood version of thugs. Like, come on, man, me, and I just didn't buy them at all. So that kind of took me out of it. Like Frank Welly, though, he was amazing. He's a great actor, but everyone around him wasn't so good. So yeah, that was a strike against it, and having the reverse order method for no good reason, honestly. I mean, they could have had that reveal without having the entire episode in reverse order. Like, they could have just had the episode go in normal order, which I think it would have made more sense. The viewer would be less confused. It seems like the reverse order, when it was started happening, you going further back, you already sort of knew that information from the future scenes you've already seen, so it's kind of useless. Kind of didn't serve a purpose other than to confirm what you already figured out. So they could have actually had it go in normal order and just have a flashback at the end of the episode that had the same reveal. So you could still save that reveal that Frank Welly was actually the hacker all along without having the entire episode go in reverse order. And I still think it would have been better. Personally, that's just me. But I still enjoyed this episode. I just wouldn't call it a great episode, but it was definitely not one of the worst of the Outer Limbs. I don't know why it's rated so lowly on IMDb. I totally disagree with that. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called Nest. And actually, this is rated even lower. I think this is like in the bottom 5 of IMDb, and I was shocked to hear that, because this episode's actually it's okay. It's not like what I would call great, but there's certainly way more episodes that are much worse than this one. It's decent. Here's the thing. I talked about the episode last season that had Ralph Macchio about like these people in the comas who went to this magical land or whatever, and how that episode sucked because of the acting was so terrible. Like the acting just really drugged the episode down. This episode is like the opposite of that, because the acting was like so good and then it elevated. So it starred, I believe his name is something like Scott Thomas. What is it? Robert Sean Leonard. I was totally off. Robert Sean Leonard, who I'd recognize from movies such as Much Ado About Nothing and the one that came out in the 90's with Keanu Reeves. And there's Swing Kids, which I watched a lot when I was a kid. But he's more recently, he's known as playing Wilson in House MD. And sort of this was kind of the period right before he did that. And he's a great actor. Like, he's a really good actor. And the whole time I was watching this episode, I was like, wow, he's a good actor. He really sells it. Now, it has the Thing type premise to it, which there's a couple of episodes of X-Files and stuff and other things, like even Star Trek Enterprise had an episode where it's a premise where you have a bunch of scientists in an enclosed location in Antarctica studying something. Some alien thing comes up and starts killing them off, and they're like trapped there because they're in Antarctica. And so that was kind of a well-known premise, but in this case it was like these evil cockroaches that apparently can go inside people's mouths and cause them to go insane and kill each other and kill themselves. And so that premise is kind of boring, I will say, but again, like the characters were really written well. So maybe that's why that attracted me to this. And plus, as I said, the acting was really good. Now, the gimmick of this episode, I'm mixed about. Part of me likes it, part of me thinks it's really cheesy. Because there's this psychologist who's called down to help after the first person dies. And apparently he has a history with Robert Sean Leonard, the main character, and they hate each other. And you find out towards the end it's because they knew each other as kids, and apparently, like, Robert Sean Leonard had a brother, and both he and his brother were, like, trapped in some... I didn't really understand exactly what it was, but they were trapped in a situation where they were going to get killed and sucked under the ice and drown. And this other psychiatrist dude was holding on to both of them, but he had to let the brother go in order to save Robert Sean Leonard, and so he was seen as a hero, but Robert Sean Leonard had resentment for him his whole life for having killed his brother. And so they hashed this out, and some of the way they hashed it out in the dialogue, I think, was a bit cheesy. I do admit. But then towards the end, the big irony ending is that Robert Sean Leonard, because he has his medical condition or whatever, he has the cure for these cockroaches who by this time have killed off everyone there except for 3 people: Robert Sean Leonard, the psychiatrist dude, and Robert Sean Leonard's fiance. And so they find out that he has, like, antibodies because he got infected, but he survived, so he's immune. They find out because of his medical condition he has these antibodies that can kill the cockroaches, and so he can donate his blood to save one, but he only has enough blood to donate to one person. Da da da! And so he has the choice of either saving his fiance, who he loves, or this dude who he blames for his brother's death. What a big shock, what a big mystery. I wonder who he's going to choose. Come on. That part of it was so dumb. It's like, duh, of course he's going to save his fiancée. Durr. And they try to play it off like because the way the dude who killed his brother, like, he confesses to it, and they try to bury the hatchet. And he tells a story about how he was holding both of those hands, but he had to let go of one hand and his brother died. And so here, Robert Sean Leonard's holding both of their hands, finding his fiance and the dude, and then he lets go of the dude's hand. Get it? Get the irony? He's letting go of the dude's hands to show that he's going to let him die to save his fiance. And then at the end, they have a newspaper that says, "Hero saves fiance." So you get the irony because the other dude was called a hero for letting his brother die, and now Robert Sean Leonard's being called a hero for letting that dude die. And that's a bit too heavy-handed for me. I'm sorry. It's a bit cheesy. But again, I don't think this is a terrible episode. Again, I thought it was really upheld by the acting and the strong character stories. Even though it got a bit cheesy there towards the end, they were trying too hard to be ironic. I still think it's completely unfair to call it one of the worst episodes of this show. I really don't get why that's the case. Anyway, let's move on to the finale, which is called Final Appeal. Now, as I mentioned, the Outer Limits was being canceled by Showtime. And so when they created this episode, it was intended to be the series finale of the entire show. But then again, as I mentioned, the Outer Limits would actually be picked up for another season by the Sci-Fi Channel. So it turned out to not be the series finale, but it was originally intended to be the series finale. If they were like Babylon 5, where it's a similar situation where I thought it was being canceled in season 4, but it got picked up by TNT for season 5. But they filmed the finale, but withheld it instead of airing it in season 4, and they showed it at the end of season 5, which I thought was a terrible decision because I thought it was totally out of place in season 5. But anyway, that's something else entirely. At least because the Outer Limits isn't like the Babylon 5 is a serialized story, whereas the Outer Limits is an anthology where every episode's different. So they didn't really feel the need to transplant it to season 7 to have it be the actual finale, which I'm glad they didn't, because frankly, I think this would have been a terrible series finale. Although mind you, as I'm recording this video, I have yet to see the actual series finale of season 7, so I've yet to know if it's any better or worse than this episode. But I do know that this episode is terrible. It's a flashback episode. As I said, the Outer Limits ends every season on a flashback episode, and so I kind of knew going in that they would end the whole. Their bright idea would be to end the whole series on the flashback episode. In fact, if this did end up being the series finale of The Outer Limits, it would be very reminiscent of the Seinfeld finale and the X-Files finale, because both of those were episodes about a trial where the main character or characters were put on trial, but it was used to have clips. It was basically a clip show. That's what Seinfeld did, and that's what the X-Files did. Although there was more to the X-Files, that was only a portion of the X-Files finale, which I actually thought was kind of decent. And it also should be noted that the X-Files finale came out after this episode because it was released in 2001, where this was released in 2000. So you can't say that this was ripping off the X-Files because it hadn't even happened yet. So you could say X-Files was inspired by this. But so you might say, well, there's no main character of The Outer Limits. Of course there isn't, because it's an anthology show. But they bring back a character from one of the most beloved episodes, which did appear in a lot of clip shows because it's a great episode. A Stitch in Time, they bring back Amanda Plummer's character. And she's put on trial, and they concoct this future. And I like how they stay true to the timeline of that episode of Stitch in Time, because they have this be not the Amanda Plummer that we saw who went crazy and back in time and killed people, but the one who resulted on the changed future that we saw at the end of the episode, which made sense. So that was interesting. But they erased Michelle Forbes' characters from the timeline. When they showed a flashback from that, like, they literally cut her character out. And I do wonder if that was a legal issue, because I noticed they used Michelle Forbes' image or the clip from that episode in last year's clip show series season finale, and I wonder if she sued them because she didn't give permission for them to use the image, so this time they weren't allowed to use it. That's a total guess, but that's something similar to that happened on Deep Space Nine with Jadzia Dax's image. So I wonder. So it makes me think that happened. But even if it wasn't that, it was obvious that for some legal reason they couldn't use her image. And so they cut her out. But anyway, the actual episode is, and I do think I've seen this before, but I think I only saw part of it. It's actually a 2-parter. On the DVDs I have, it was placed as a 2-part episode. So I think it probably originally aired as a 2-hour episode. But on reruns, they would have aired it as 2 parts, which is what I was watching. So I think I saw maybe part of the first part, and that's it. Because a lot of stuff I very clearly don't remember and I've never seen before. But some of it I have, because when they had Charlton Heston be one of the judges, that immediately sparked my memory, because I had definitely seen that. But anyway, the episode is about them putting Teresa Givens, the character from A Stitch in Time, on trial, because apparently she traveled to the future where technology is forbidden, because there was some Holocaust and they blame it on technology, so they sort of reverted to horse and carriage and the few survivors of this nuclear Holocaust, and they banned technology, and she brought a whole bunch of time travel technology with her, and her goal was to purposely pass technology around to try to reunite the age of technology, because she went to a point even further in the future where there was a deadly virus that killed everyone because they didn't have the proper technology to deal with it. And I guess this could have been an interesting premise if they did something interesting with it, but I don't think they did. I thought it was interesting that they used a clip from the episode Quarantine or not, it wasn't called Quarantine. What was it called? Vaccine? I believe it was called Vaccine. Anyway, that episode, there was like a, virus that wiped out the human race, but it was obviously set in contemporary times, yet they used that clip to show this has some distant future, but whatever. And also, some of the other ways they use clips is like very contrived and doesn't really have anything to do with the story. They just got to show these clips, and they kind of alter it. Like they showed a clip from that episode, Tribunal, my favorite episode so far, and they put that one of the characters from this episode in it instead of I forgot his name already. Preston, whatever, Prentice, yeah. They put him instead of him, which I think is dumb. It was so obviously, it looked weird too. It was so obviously altered, and they didn't do a good job at it. So, yeah, it's really frustrating. I didn't really like it. And then they had, so basically at the end of this episode, which was all about, or the first part was all about them trying to decide if they want to convict her and hang her or if they want to let her reignite technology. And then this other dude shows up with a bomb strapped to his chest, and he seems to be this evil time traveler that she also knew who time traveled for more evil purposes, and he's like threatening to like blow everyone up unless they convict her. But then he says, I'm not gonna do it, I just want to say my piece and then I'll go away. And so he does, he says his piece and he goes away, and then you learn they decide to acquit her, not hang her, but then the device he left behind, which he also, by the way, claimed that it wasn't a bomb. He said it was lying. It's not a bomb, I was lying. But it was a bomb, and it does blow them all up. And everyone, the whole city and the whole eastern seaboard or whatever is blown up and dies because of this crazy madman, because they didn't give the verdict he wanted. It's not good. I'm sorry. This would have been a terrible finale. They're kind of ruining, they keep going back to A Stitch in Time and like ruining it. One of the other flashbacks tried to say that the Michelle Forbes character was killed, but then they altered the story to make it so there was an alien that was posing as her boyfriend, which was nonsense. And this time they tried to say that this Teresa Givens went on to be a time traveler, and she ends up dying in this like non-technology future, which I think is a poor end. They just should leave that fucking episode alone. They keep going back to it because they know it's one of their best episodes, but it stands great on its own. Stop trying to capitalize in it. I suppose they were trying to make this a good send-off to the show that sort of brought up past episodes and sort of honored it before, but I don't think it honors it. I think it does it a disservice. So all in all, I really didn't like this episode and thought it was a terrible ending. So, those are all the episodes of Season 6. So now it's time for me to get into my favorite episode and my least favorite episode of the season. First, let's start with the worst episode of the season. There was strong contenders for this. It was Down to Earth, that stupid comedy episode with the dude from Whose Line Is It Anyway, where they were making fun of people at conventions. And then there's a bad end, a very poorly scripted, poorly directed episode that didn't really make any sense about the evil cult leader dude coming back to life after being in hibernation. And then there's Gettysburg, which, as I talked about, was had a strong foundation, but they really fucked up the ending. They didn't pay off any of the things they were setting up for, and it made the Princess Time Traveler guy look like an idiotic douchebag. So, the worst episode of the season, though, will go to Seeds of Destruction, as that was the ridiculous episode where the genetically engineered corn was causing everyone to turn into monsters and die from like tons of tumors, and yet the CDC was not even called. I can't buy it. And then all the characters were unlikable, and you couldn't relate to any of them, and they weren't well fleshed out, and they were all cliche mustache twirly, two-dimensional people you don't even give a shit about anyway. So definitely the worst episode of the season. Now, as for the best episode of the season, there were some runner-ups for this one. As I said, there were a lot of good episodes this season. There's Judgment Day, about the reality show where they try to kill someone. It's like the Running Man episode, try to kill someone who's convicted of murder. There's Manifest Destiny, the found footage style Event Horizon-esque story that was actually very creepy and very well pulled off. There was Beholder, about the dude who was blind, but he got his eyes, but he could see this alien entity, and the government tried to use him to capture her. Glitch, the one about the androids. The dude find out he was an android, and then they found out his wife was an android, and then they go off and be androids together. That was actually interesting. And then Decompression, the one with the dude from Babylon 5, being the president and on an airplane that the time traveler says is going to crash, and he was just fucking with them in order to kill him because he turns out to be an evil dictator. And there's also Zigzag. I'll throw that out as honorable mention as well, because that was actually a good episode about these dystopian future and these hackers trying to prevent it, and it was going backwards, and about the microchips thing. It was really good world building in that episode, and Frank Whaley is always great. But as for the best episode of Season 6, I'm going to have to go with Stasis, the episode that takes place in a dystopian future where half the world's population is put in stasis, and the elite, and they actually called them the elite, they didn't even think of an inventive name, they're just the elite, but whatever. The elite control everything, and they benefit off of all the misery of the workers, and eventually the workers revolt and prevent this thing from happening. Anyway, so I love that episode. I thought it was well constructed. I love the commentary. I think it's very relevant. And I like how they kind of threw you off by making you think that this guy is an asshole, he's a bad guy, but he actually turns out to be for the cause and is willing to put his personal feelings aside. By the way, he was played by God, I keep forgetting the dude's name from Stargate Atlantis. He was a recurring character, and I've seen him. He's been in Outer Limits like 5 or 6 times. Lorne, that was his name, the character's name from the Stargate Atlantis, but Major Lorne, yeah, he was a reoccurring character, and he's been in Outer Limits like 6 times or some shit. But yeah, he's a good actor. It's funny because his first appearance in the Outer Limits, he was like a teenager. He looked so young, but here is a lot. His age is a lot closer to what it was when he played Major Lorne. But anyway, yeah. So I really like that episode. As for my rating for Season 6 as a whole, I think I am going to give this season an 8 out of 10. An 8, extremely good. Even though there weren't any absolutely great blow-you-away episodes, there were no 10s this season, but there was a lot of 8s. A few 9s. Actually, no, there was only one 9. I lied. One 9, but there's a lot of 8s. And a few, and mostly 7s, and just a few ones that were like 4, 3. I think 2 was Seeds of Destruction was the lowest. But so overall, my point is, like, there were more good episodes than there were bad episodes. So the season was more consistently good, and so unlike Season 5, which I was like, what episode is it going to be next? Is it going to suck? Most likely, because there was just a lot of bad and average episodes in a row, with a few great episodes like in the mix, but mostly bad and average episodes. So it made it uncomfortable watch. Whereas Season 6, I was more optimistic when I was like, oh, this episode's probably going to be great, because they've been doing a lot of good episodes. And granted, that made it even worse when there was a bad episode, but there's not that many of them. So yeah, Season 6 gets an 8 out of 10 for me. So that is it for my review of Season 6 of The Outer Limits. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover The Outer Limits. Next month I will cover the final season, Season 7 of The Outer Limits. And the month after, I will do my top 10, not top 10, it's top 30 or whatever, but I will count down my favorite and least favorite episodes of The Outer Limits. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for many more videos and other shows, such as The Expanse, Better Call Saul, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.